Welcome to the officers that we've got present who are going to help with the presentations and on the screen, and Councillor Bird, who is here for the housing item as portfolio lead. So we'll go straight into his apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Clements, Councillor DeCiccio, and we have Councillor Grinsell substituting for Councillor DeCiccio. Apologies received from Councillor People and Councillor Sweet.
I believe we are still core at those today, so well done. Every meeting this year, I think, has been core at, so well done to everybody for turning up. Item 2 then, do we have any declarations of interest in line with the information on your agenda? No? Okay, so moving on to item 3 and Chair's remarks. Firstly, you'll notice it is a really packed agenda today. So I am going to limit contributions to 1 per person to start with, so that we can at least get as many people speaking as possible. If at the end of the majority of contributions people want to come back in and we've got time, that's fine. But I just want to be fair to everybody so everybody gets an opportunity to contribute. It's the final committee of this municipal year. Can't believe how quickly it's gone, but I think we have done some really good work this year, particularly in terms of some of the pre-discussion scrutiny that we've been involved in. The air quality paper, I think we made some really good recommendations to, and they were included. So I want to thank you all for the positive way that you've taken part in this committee and the cross-party contributions that have been made. I think they have been really valuable. The housing deep dive has been concluded and Lisa will present on that. And thank you to everybody who took part in that meeting. I know on top of attending scrutiny meetings and reading all your papers, it is a commitment, but it is appreciated and it is a valuable exercise. The skills review that we were hoping to take part in next week, Lisa and I are going to have a bit more discussion about that, because I don't think from an officer perspective in terms of papers we are really ready to be able to do justice to that review. So it might be that we do the scoping of it this time and take the recommendations forward into next year's committee, but we will have a look at that outside of this meeting. As I've said, thanks to everybody who's taken part and the manner in which people have taken part in this scrutiny meeting. Particular thanks to Lisa as Vice Chair, who has really supported me through this year, because some of the stuff that we deal with here is really complex and getting your head around it. So many thanks to Lisa and to Lindsay, who does a phenomenal amount behind the scenes, and the committee would not run anywhere near the way it does if it weren't for the work that Lindsay puts into it. So thank you to you. Okay, let's move on then. We'll take the minutes of the meeting on the 10th of January and we'll take them first of all for accuracy. So page 1, page 2, 3 and 4. We agree that they're an accurate and true records of that meeting?
Yeah,
thank you. And then we'll pick up any matters arising. So I've just updated you on minute number 42A regarding the deep dive on skills, and we'll come back to you on that. Any other matters arising from people? The governance review, as you'll see on 42B, is picked up on the agenda. And the only other item I think that we needed to pick up was page 4 on the grant register, and the community renewal fund information was shared just after the last meeting. Okay, so I think we can move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is item 6, and that's the mayoral question time budget response from the Mayor. So do I have any comments or anything that anybody would like to raise on that? No? Thank you. So we just note that report then. And that takes us on to item 7, which is the Wmca Housing and Land Delivery Board. Now, having had a quick chat with Mike beforehand and with Lisa, we're going to combine a feedback on the housing review that was conducted on Friday, because some of the issues they're cross-cutting, so it just makes sense to try and pick them up together, and it also allows Mike and Gareth time to respond to both of them as well. So I'll hand straight over to Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the report is quite succinct and actually tells you the success that we've had as a housing and land board. I think it is fair to say we are the most successful combined authority for delivering housing. Gareth is very good at getting money out of government, but of course that's geared by the amount of outputs that we get. We still struggle with land in the Black Country because it is contaminated, and Brownfield first is a policy that we're still working on. Our job is to fill the gap on viability, many of which have been successful in areas such as, well, the major one in Walton is the old Caparo site, which is now certainly well underway. But there are other sites around the Black Country, and indeed one in Fountain Lane in Albury, which again was very much a contaminated site. We are still getting a number of approaches from developers. We tend to get the same developer coming forward, and we are keeping our eyes on our exposure to those developers, which I think is important. But certainly we're here to answer questions and just basically, I hope, support the work of the Housing and Land Board going forward.
Thanks for that overview, Mike. Gareth, is there anything you want to pick up particularly in terms of the presentation?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few slides actually. I don't know whether it's possible to just pop them on the screen. Would that be possible? Just on the item on affordable housing, Chair. Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. So just for the Chair and committee benefit, this just sets out a few of the principles that have come out of the Housing and Land Board over recent months around affordable housing. So just firstly, this first slide just sets out that we have quite an integrated approach to affordable housing delivery in the region. Affordable housing is a really multifaceted topic. So it involves working with Homes England, working with investors and developers, working closely with local authorities, who are the local planning authorities in the region, using our funding from the Brownfield housing and land work that Councillor Bird referenced to unlock affordable housing delivery, public land disposals being an important area looking forward that we're keen to work on, working with housing associations and working through industry task forces. So that slide just gives you a frame for the multifaceted approach that we now have to trying to unlock greater levels of affordable housing within the region. And our view of affordable housing and the definition of affordable housing includes social housing, includes shared ownership, and includes other forms of affordable housing. So just on the next slide, you see the difference between the affordable housing definition that's applied to combined authority investments. They're looking at social rent, targeted sectors, shared ownership, help to own and others, and in comparison to the MPPF definition. So that's the government national definition of affordable housing, which is much more wide ranging, but it doesn't really allow a focus on the local situation that's happening within a particular local environment. So hence why a regional definition was included. And just on the right hand side of the slide, you see the reasons why we decided through the Housing and Land Board to introduce an affordable housing definition. A, the national definition cannot reflect local needs and circumstances in the way we'd all like to see. Secondly, that you need a definition that reflects a whole range of factors that influence affordability and housing market demand. And thirdly, you need a definition that tackles issues regarding inaccessibility to housing and establish criteria relevant to specific locations. Just a few more slides, if that's okay, Chair. Dan, if you could move on. So we've been doing some increasing working with housing associations within the region, working with Homes England to try and secure more investment in the region. The housing associations have been a founding member of the Housing and Land Board since day one. So we have the chair of the the West Midlands Housing Association Partnership, which is the partnership of housing associations in the region who sits on the Housing and Land Board. And we're establishing a wider board with housing associations to look at things beyond just affordable housing, looking at net zero, modular construction and wellbeing, providing a dedicated portal for affordable housing, and working with the Homelessness Task Force to design out a homelessness approach. Just the next slide, please, quickly. Finally, we've been looking at a pilot proposal, which will test the working between WMCA and housing associations on a few specific areas of land. This proposal originally came in 2019 from the Housing Association partners, and through the work that we've been doing under the Housing and Land Board and with the help of feedback from Overview and Scrutiny, we've decided to first of all look at a pilot to test the systems, the relationship and the delivery model to ensure that it does demonstrably help address regional need, that it does demonstrably deliver broader CA policy objectives like inclusive growth and brownfield regeneration, and that the pilot would bring together the expertise and resources of some of the largest housing associations in the region with the combined authority. This would all be based on a robust business case that needs to look at land, investment and governance. And that is still being worked through at the moment. And again, we'll come to scrutiny and we'll come to the Housing and Land Board and we'll go to the Investment Board as appropriate. Just final slide then, please, Dan. So this was the progress update that we took to Housing and Land Board in March. Included within your pack is the report that went to the Housing and Land Board in March and the slides. So it flagged the progress that was being made in developing the thinking around a pilot approach, the crucial importance of the pilot, maximising affordable housing supply alongside low carbon and inclusive growth, that we're waiting for the housing associations to develop some sample delivery proposals for the board to consider, that the package must deliver 100% affordable housing, progress towards zero carbon homes, public transport access and high standards in placemaking. Pilot would be similar to that of Help to Own, involving detailed analysis, particularly around land, governance and investment, as I said earlier. The board welcomed the criteria underpinning the pilot approach, the general greater work between WMCA and housing associations on collaboration and co-investment, greater work with Homes England on a similar basis, and also the broad package of affordable housing measures, which I mentioned at the start of the meeting, into which this fills. As I said, the key now is to work up proposals for the pilot for the board to consider, and then to work through the decisions on land, governance and investment. I hope that's helpful, Chair, just as a bit of a background to the work we're doing with housing associations in the region.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Gareth. So the committee can see on page 13 the recommendations that you're asked to consider. And I would just note that actually this seems to have moved on changed quite significantly since you last came to present to us when we did the call-in over the housing vehicle. So there's been some significant changes, I think, from where we were to where you are now.
Yeah.
So if I can open it up then to contributions from members. Lisa, do you want to come in first?
Is it worth coming in?
Sorry, John.
Is it worth me coming in first to reflect back on what we found from the Housing Scrutiny Review? Because I think, importantly, that reflects the kind of recommendations that we want to take back. And can I be clear that in what I'm saying is not disrespectful to anyone who's, I know has worked hard to achieve things, but we actually have to own the system. And what became quite apparent through the data, the explanations and the evidence we got last Friday, the housing system is broken, and that is not a result of the combined authority or local government or national government. It's cumulative impact of decades of change that actually have started to create some of the problems we have. And I think critically, Mike, where with respect I will differ with you, I think the combined authority has been successful in housing numbers, but housing numbers do not address the needs of this region. What we have is large numbers of delivery, but not delivering the kind of housing and the mix of housing that is needed to make this a sustainable and prosperous region. And there's loads and loads of anomalies. And I think that was almost, we got to the end of the day and our sort of mind was slightly blown. And also, I think your report picks up on a number of the issues. And can I also first welcome the movement on the affordable housing vehicle and how it's moved from securing a profit or a return for the combined authority and associations to much more that desire to see a return for neighbourhoods. What I would say is I think in future it would suggest in process that if we had been approached as a scrutiny, that there was a desire to see housing associations that are embedded in our region, they're managing stock that was previously local authority, they have a large substantial portfolio, that there was a need to share some risk, to work together, there would have been a very different approach to the way that it came to this committee. So again, the importance of pre-scrutiny and actually ensuring that we're all on the same page at the start, I think is a lesson we should take back. So very quickly, just again, just some quick feedback. We will provide a report, and again, we want the steer of Scrutiny and yourselves and Mike as to how best to do this. But what you have within the system that we currently have, and we by no means covered everything, but there was generally an agreement of all who presented, and indeed between officers and members that, across parties, that there were so many contradictions and conflicts in the system. It was actually a wonder you managed to provide any social or affordable housing in the region, let alone what we have provided. And what we also had to own, that was also sometimes down to the behaviours of local authorities. It might be, an example was given Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust. It can be the largest provider of social housing if it's the only one that's able to access the land. It's, you know, it is by default something that Birmingham has to own. But there are a number of contradictions, and I just want to flag a number of these up. There is, starting with local authorities, we have an absolute contradiction in our long-term financial plans. Quite often we seek to secure a major return because of the cuts, because of the need, and the drive to receive a receipt on the sale of land actually then undermines the capability to develop and bring forward affordable or social housing in the region. The shortage of land and available land and the ability to almost demand what you want, because private developers are now looking at smaller packages of lands, means that we're increasingly seeing flip sales. So you might actually see a local authority, public authority procures one type of product and then it gets sold back to another developer, and you very quickly end up with a different situation. We have a real issue in terms of capacity, capability and the costs of land assembly and CPO. There are opportunities to share expertise, we believe, across the combined authority region. There is land and packages that could be brought forward, and we need to be braver in the way we do it. There was an acceptance, and the combined authority was commended on its focus on affordable housing and the 20% target. And then there was the inevitable consequences and how then the market behaves. And actually what the market has seen is that the 20% is what it aims for, rather than actually it respects the need threshold. So in my case, Birmingham has a 35% need threshold, but actually what the market does is play it down to 20%. So whilst it sought to be helpful, actually it's had a contradictory process. What slightly blew my mind, and a number of my colleagues, was Homes England actually just dropping in that a number of our areas in this region, and particularly say if you look at Walsall, where Walsall has 14,000 people on the waiting list, 5 times the size of what Birmingham's need is. Walsall does not qualify for social housing grants in the way that other parts of this region do, because the government set affordable housing areas, and what that means is you've got to have some significantly high house prices in your area to qualify for that grant. So no wonder we're having these problems. It was also, there was a discussion around targets. There are various targets for Brownfield Reclamation grant, which also means you inevitably go for some of the larger developments over some of the smaller, more complex, because ultimately that's what government wishes you to provide, and the importance of devolution. The absolute importance of across the board within the region, understanding the housing need and reflecting upon this. And again, you know, I do remember the days of regional spatial strategies, and I did love regional spatial strategies. And what we did have was an understanding of the differential need across the region, which we currently do not have. And that is a gap, whether we like it politically or not, it is a gap. What we've also seen is a massive growth in the private rented sector that is not being resourced or understood in the way that actually it is now impacting. It is impacting massively upon homelessness in the city. And we had a really sad testimony from one woman, and her whole experience of private renting had really been detrimental to her mental health. A key issue, a bureaucratic issue, is the local housing allowance, and the market levels that are set are not reflective of our market levels within this region. And we need to challenge those assessments, because in effect, those assessments are pushing people into homelessness, and by default then costs the government more, because people get pushed into the exempt accommodation, and that kinds of accommodation that seek to exploit the system. Or again, in the case of Birmingham, £30 million worth of bed and breakfast costs, and the actual cost to government and local government is much larger than tackling this system. We also need to look at the existing stock. A number of people referred to the problems they have with the existing stock, the challenge of post-Grenfell, but equally what we can say is whatever our political views on right to buy, it stabilised a lot of our neighbourhoods. Those people who have occupied the rent to buy are now moving on, dying, changing, and we're seeing private renting coming in some of our low-cost areas. We're seeing landlords from London buy in bulk properties, and that's bringing complex needs onto estates where local authorities don't have the services on site to address those complex needs. So again, we're seeing an increase on some estates of neighbourhood nuisance associated with the private rented sector. The absolute scarring on the family life cycle of B&B was very much reflected by another testimony we received. And again, that absolute cost, and we all know that there is a very strong relationship between time in B&B, time in school exclusions, or time out of school. And that absolute need to focus on bed and breakfast as a means of addressing inclusion in our region was seen to be a key issue. And within that, what I would say is, whilst housing first and dealing with rough sleepers is kind of sexy media friendly, it's not actually the core problem we should be confronting. And we need to almost not get distracted by the obvious, but be prepared to actually tackle the systemic. And again, this wasn't, it was partly Vera sent me some her reflections from the meeting, and mine, and I try and tie it up to, we talk about customer experience. These aren't customers, these are people without choice, and actually we're not respecting people's rights. And we actually fundamentally need to look to the rights of people in our region. So, in conclusion, our feeling is that no one sphere of governance, combined authority, local authority, national government can address this in isolation. With the levelling up agenda, with somebody like Michael Gove in charge, there is an opportunity to actually address properly the systemic problems and the challenges we face. What that will require is, across all parties, us to own the challenges in this region and be willing to tackle them. What we're not sure to do is where to go with what we found in the report. Do we do an open letter? Do we talk to the mayor? Do we do a briefing to you? What we feel is, and certainly having seen the testimony to the women, I'm certainly, and the members of the committee I think would agree with me, we're not prepared to let this one lie or drift, because there are things that are in all of our control, all of our influence that we could change now, and we need to step by step work through that. So actually, we've all got to be a little bit more grown up and actually work through the rules of the game to actually start addressing housing need in our region. I hope that reflects the committee's findings.
Thanks for that, Lisa. And I think it does add some additional context to the earlier presentation from Mike and Gareth. Before we address the final points that Lisa made in terms of where do we take that housing recommendations, if we can return to the substantive item, and then I'll take any questions directed at Gareth or to Mike that the committee might have. Councillor Ali.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is it Gareth?
Yeah, Gareth.
Okay. Still trying to understand affordable housing, but from reading this material, I was wondering where Coventry is in this. How does Coventry fit in? And then also, from my understanding, affordable housing was 25%. But on here, you've written, is it the pilot package to deliver is 100%? So exactly what does that mean? Also, in one of the pages here, there's saying that the proposal was started from 2019. So we are now in 2022. So is that going in accordance to plan, or has pandemics had anything to do with delaying the process? And again, where does Coventry lie into this? Because we are from Coventry, so I'd like to have some answers for that. Thank you.
You want to take that, Gareth?
Yeah, really happy to. So when the combined authority was set up, when the Housing and Land Board started, there were many schemes in the region that were securing less than 20% affordable housing. Many schemes were securing 5% or lower. So it was the view that we needed to set a minimum target to make sure that it didn't get negotiated down. So you see often on development sites, there's an affordable housing target that gets negotiated downwards. So there was a view that there needed to be a minimum. Now that minimum was 20%, was the affordable housing target set at the time. But actually what we've seen is the average across all the Housing and Land Board's programmes is actually 25%, not the minimum of 20%, because we're seeing quite a lot of schemes come forward above that 20%. And in terms of your second question, which was around the 100%, this is just for the small pilot. So the idea is that the small pilot would pilot a few schemes with 100% affordable housing. We do have some of those schemes in the region at the moment that are at 100% affordable housing. Generally, they have quite a lot of social housing grant from Homes England that gets put into those schemes, which relates to Councillor Trickett's point earlier on around some parts of the region not being able to access that funding in the way other parts of the region can. And just on your final point on Coventry, are a member of the Housing and Land Board, and so I've been involved in all these proposals, and officers from Coventry are on the Affordable Housing Working Group that we run, and on the Delivery Steering Group, which is a group of housing directors within the region that look at all the Housing and Land Board papers and proposals.
Thanks. Councillor Chalk.
Thank you. Just a quite quick comment, I suppose. I can't speak for Kidderminster and Brownfield, but I'm not absolutely certain what their situation is. But I do know that as far as Redditch is concerned, we have sort of one major problem, and that is land. We just do not have land, and we have very little, if any, brownfield sites. We are, as a borough council, I think for the first time in years, actually building social housing as a council, which is very unusual. But our concern is actually the opposite end of the scale. We, as a borough council, we're desperate for A, B and C level housing, because that's where the cash comes in to fulfil the needs of the council. That's where we get our housing rates from, council rates. So yes, we've got that as a problem, if you wish. We also did a survey, and I'm going to say 5 years ago, but please don't quote me on that, whereby we discovered that the only place, I think at the time we got 35% social housing across the board, and the only place where we could get that was in a village called Feckenham. And apart from that, nowhere else in the whole of the borough was it viable. None of the developers, even the big ones, little ones, could actually make the 35% viable. So now we've got a more open arrangement whereby, depending on the area of the borough, we've got different levels. Now, I don't know whether that's the same across the whole of West Mine, but to me, that's a suitable way of going about things. So, thank you.
Gareth, did anyone want to come back on any of those comments?
I think the last comment in particular is quite an interesting one, just about how we look at different affordable housing levels within area and across the region. The other thing we started to look at is how we can get closer to the local plan policy levels of affordable housing on some of these brownfield sites. So we've gone on many sites from 5% or 10% to 20% minimum, which is where the combined authority put the affordable housing ratio, and what we can do to get even further above that to be even closer to local authority levels. The reality is that probably will require some more grant coming in from Homes England or others in order to get the funding to a higher level. Thank you.
Mike, is there anything you want to comment on what you've heard so
Yeah,
far?
I think we have to be realistic. And whilst I hear what Lisa says, and it's an all-embracing issue about social housing, a lot of this is down to the local planning authority. At the end of the day, we are not a planning authority. We can only designate to developers the parameters of a grant from this combined authority. And as a result, if they don't need a grant, then it's down to the local authority to look at how they adjust their area plans and indeed local plans, as Gareth has mentioned. But the planning authority, whether that be Coventry, Birmingham, Walsall, Sandwell, Dudley, is really where that designation should be. Because we are not wholly responsible, we are not a planning authority. And the only thing we can do is when somebody comes for a grant from this authority to say, look, there's our SCF, single commissioning framework, we insist no less than 20%. No less than 20%. And as Gareth said, we have been successful in getting that up to 25% as an average. But developers at the end of the day, I heard from Councillor Chalk about land. You're right, they aren't making any more. And as a result, it does have a premium. And people are now expecting more for the land that is available. Brownfield sites, of course, are not the preferred option for any developer. And the process we go through at the moment, which is, of course, the Black Country Greenbelt Review, developers are sitting back and waiting for that to happen because they'd rather build on a greenfield site than a brownfield site. And, you know, I'm pushing back on that because 10% of the greenbelt that's looking to come out for residential is in Walsall. So I think it is important that we've got limited funds, and what we have to do, there are some smaller sites which are more complicated, as you've already said. However, we have to go for the highest number that attracts more grant from government. And if we've got a site that needs less of a grant for viability, then in actual fact, that's where we will go, in preference to one that will take all of the funds available to us. But as I say, I'll make the point quite clearly. The local planning authority are the people who actually specify with any developer what their requirements are. We can't impose that on local authorities at all.
So I'll bring Lisa back in shortly. I've got Councillor Akhtar who was indicating.
Thank you, Chair. On last Friday, we heard from the Housing Association. There were two main things which came out from it. One was the shortage of land, and the other one was political interference in the planning system. And I think they were referring to maybe locally when the council got involved with the petitions and all that. But there is something bigger than that in the planning, where we have Coventry facing in it, where the Mayor of West Midland is campaigning against our local plan. And two of our main planning applications, the Eastern Green SUE and Kersley SUE, was actually called in by the Secretary, but it didn't call in, but the local Conservative group with the Mayor and District, they have to written to the Secretary of State to call those applications in, although they did not, because the government required the Coventry City Council to build 40,000 houses by 2031. And that political interference, because our local plans gone through all the stages. But as Councillor Bird said, that planning is with the local authority, rightly so. But we shouldn't actually interfere with the local planning issue for a few words. That's what I would like to say. And the other thing about the land, about the main issue about the land one, the land is expensive and the local authorities are not going to sell it cheap because the last 10 years of austerity, they need money. So how we are going forward to actually help those associations to buy land maybe on discounted price or maybe we give them some sort of grant or if it's possible. And the other point is, Chair, city like Wolverhampton, Coventry, Birmingham, we have universities. And we have seen in Coventry where some of the neighborhoods have been taken over by the student population, but we have curbed on it now. We have built so many purpose-built accommodation. So, for example, in my ward, we have seen now decrease in the student number in the local area because they prefer to live in the town with their mates. I think this is another thing which we need to look into. A city like Wolverhampton, Coventry, and Birmingham target the student population in the city centres. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Tim, have you got any comments you want to come back on that? And then I'll come to you, Peter. Gareth?
Yeah, just to say, and just responding to one of Councillor Trickett's point, which I thought was really helpful, which is one of the things we've been looking to do is to bring forward land on difficult to deliver sites and looking at land assembly to try and bring forward more land forward. And that definitely feels a really important area going forward to both answer a number of the councillors' comments is how can the CA help with land assembly and help to bring forward more land into the system, including looking at potential CPO powers both that the combined authority have and local authorities have as well. And also Councillor Trickett's point on capacity and capability and how we can share resourcing more effectively. Again, that's another area that we started to look into, which I think is a really useful point. And then the other part is housing associations do have funding from Homes England under their strategic partnerships, which they can use to acquire and assemble sites. So I think one of the questions for me is just thinking about how did the combined authority, local authority and housing associations work effectively together in acquiring and assembling those sites and bringing them forward, and almost that sort of tripartite approach between ourselves, housing associations and local authorities to bring land forward in a more effective way, I think is really, really vital as we go forward in the future. So, thanks, Chair.
Councillor Fowler and then yourself, Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Your last comment was pretty happy to what I was putting down for limited. I like the word, actually, the words land assembly, because as was talked about, looking for land, and I guess there is as well, you're looking at a land assembly. I had written down a list of possible sites, Brownfield, in all local authority areas. But of course, one thing that is also mindful of is people, and I'm sure planning and others will turn around and say, well, we have a challenge here, and that is the infrastructure, because when you have new housing, then people will say, what about the schools? What about the doctors? Then there's hopefully connectivity, which is another important one within the within the combined authority and local association or authorities, because we are looking for jobs, and therefore we're then looking at that connectivity. I think Lisa picked up a very good point as well about some of the landlords that we have, and I'm sure it's all in your areas as well, but in my patch of Harborne, I know that we have, which I won't mention the name of the area, but I know there are one or two areas are getting bombarded with HMOs. And I've got one particular place where they have said people who have lived there, there's people who have passed away, and those that are still behind are now fearful because it's just changed so much, because the people that are in these HMOs, for whatever reasons, are coming and going quite quickly. And I think the lack of care for those areas is quite prominent, because basically they don't care. It's because I'm going to be there for a long time. Some people regretfully have health issues, etc., mental health, and that doesn't help. But it does have that spin-off that we all have to help and address. And it's also been talking about land. We've talked about contaminated land, and of course we all need to try and deal with that contaminated land. But as people will say, well, that depends on how long it will take in years to actually clear that contaminated land, so you are able to then build on. And I think as well, Mike, it is that cost of land that when you've got people from London and other areas, they just see, I'll use the word cash cow, because they say, I've got a property here, if you want to buy it, it's how much you're prepared to pay for it. And then that has the knock-on effect to when we're trying to build new houses, including affordable. And I think finally, Chair, hopefully working again in partnership with, obviously it's mentioned about housing associations, but I was also looking at jobs, working in partnership with people of how we can help people who need training to get onto the jobs ladder, to improve their prospects and actually move up to more better housing. So it has that effect where as they move on, other people then move in, and hopefully it builds up and people have more aspirations and have a better quality of life. And I think likewise that final bit was the mention about, as we've done clearly in Birmingham, we can see lots of purpose-built student accommodation all around the city now, and that's where most of the students actually prefer to actually live now, rather than out in the sticks or out of the city centre. And I think likewise it's trying to work together for people who are homeless, that there's buildings that would need to be in the city centre, and how we can then likewise incorporate those in the same thing. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. I'm not sure there's any comments to come back on that. I think it was more observation, but fine. I've got Councillor Padder next, then I'll come to you, Councillor Kettle, and then I'm going to tie up with Lisa. So, Councillor Padder.
Yeah, I guess the land is premium, and also as councillors, for me particularly, my casework, top of the pile, is homelessness. And so we do talk about social housing. The question I was asking was, with this industry moving around, there are a lot of factories that are closed and offices, people tend to start working from home. Are we looking to repurpose those buildings? And if you're looking for new land, maybe that's something to look closer. Thank you.
Before I just go to Gareth, I will just exercise a cautionary word on that. I'm a town centre, Dudley town centre councillor, and we've had a number of offices that have been repurposed into accommodation that are very small, done very cheaply, and are not going to be sustainable or pass the test of time. And we're having a lot of criminality and antisocial behaviour problems attached to them. So whilst I think if they're done properly, they probably can work. Unfortunately, in my experience, we are having a lot of issues. Gareth, do you want to comment?
Yeah, the chair's absolutely right. One of the big challenges we have is office to residential permitted development, right? That doesn't go through planning and have the usual checks that we normally see. But you raise a really important point that came up at Housing and Land Board when we were in the pandemic, and we're seeing coming out a massive structural shift in town centres and the role and purpose of town centres. I think we just need to be a bit careful though, because I think what we're seeing is as people are coming back to offices, they're really re-engaging with the social connection that they missed when they were working from home a lot. So there was a trend to remote working during the pandemic. There's then a trend to what we call hybrid or mixed working now. But when you talk to lots of the sort of big office owners, commercial developers at the moment, they're really watching to see actually whether people will stay at home 3 days a week, or whether actually they'll be brought back into the office because they'll miss that social connection as much. So one of the challenges with property in general, but particularly in our region that we've got, is the flexibility to adapt to where the economy is moving and where the shifts are occurring in the economy. And town centres are at the absolute heart of it. And town centre planning is therefore really challenging at the moment to try and get that repurposing right. One of the jobs of the Combined Authority, I think, is to make sure we use our devolved housing and land funding, but also our negotiations with Whitehall, negotiation with government, to get the flexibility in our funding that means we can tackle individual challenges in buildings in town centres within the region. So Councillor Bird referred to earlier on, Councillor Trickett, we have very strict housing outputs with each of our funds. I think where we're trying to move, and you've got an agenda item later on the devolution deal, one of the areas is to try and get a more holistic, more strategic view with these devolved funds as they come forward. So rather than it be just X number of houses, it's a much more holistic view of places and creating quality places. That's where I want to try and get our funding to, where actually we have the flexibility to deliver schemes. Some schemes might not deliver any housing outputs, but within the context of transforming a place, they're the right thing to do. That's where we need to try and, I think, get to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kettle?
Thank you. I thought Lisa's appraisal very early on was wide reaching and very interesting. And the way I interpreted much of it was that fundamentally our authorities need far more delegated freedom to act on the subject of housing. And funds and discretion can also be part of this ongoing initiative, because it's going to be with us for years. This concept of going forward won't be sorted overnight, will it? I think it's something that will be there for years. And we also need to allow local authorities to get on with the job without too many levels of bureaucracy. That's the one aspect. But another aspect of what Lisa said, and she mentioned the homelessness, and we have had people either move into our area or virtually become professional beggars.
Yeah.
And we had a very interesting session last year with people from Birmingham who've got a dedicated group of people to work on the homelessness, and the subject of professional beggars was discussed between us, and it is a massive problem. And we had four picked up, the people, the councillors in Stourbridge got the four homeless people that were around the town centre together and tried to help them. 3 of them out of the 4 went home at night, and the other refused all help. But the one interesting aspect was that the one admitted he could make £70 an hour begging on the streets.
Yeah.
You know, this is incredible. And how on earth we ever really are going to tackle this subject is something I don't know. But Birmingham's initiative to concentrate on the subject was very interesting, and the people were very professional, and it was very good to listen to. It really was. Rather than pin down the authorities on the 10 or 20%, I was on the meeting with the police commissioner the other day, where he said the problem with the West Midlands was that we had too many A's and B's in the system, and that this affected police funding, which was based on D-band. And the police commissioner said his funding was 21 million lower than something like comparable to Manchester, because we had too many low-banded houses. So I think we need the discretion to act over the year. Certainly need affordable housing, and we certainly need to look at this project in a broader sense. But we also need what I've always called aspirational houses, where people need to move up to better quality accommodation throughout their life. And I think wealth creation and aspiration are part of the subject as well, to help people get onto the feet. So I hope I haven't gone on too far, but it was interesting to listen to Lisa, how broadly based her appraisal was, and the different aspects that that are going to affect our thinking, haven't it, Mike? Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, if I can ask Lisa to pick up those comments when she sums up, because we are running over, and I do want to bring Councillor Waters in because she hasn't had an opportunity to comment yet. So, Vera, if you can make the last comments, and then I'll bring Lisa in.
It's just an observation. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's just an observation, really. I'll put it in simple layman's terms, one size doesn't fit all, and the powers that be seem to think that they do. Each individual area is different and needs actually twigging a bit to actually address the issues that are actually there.
Thanks very much, Vera. Well said, and I think your experience on Friday at Friday's housing review, I think, has probably informed that. So absolutely. Okay, I'm going to ask Lisa to very quickly sum up from her position, and then we'll look at the recommendations because we have run over.
Thank you. Just to pick up on the point of begging and homelessness, it is really, really important that we separate out people who seek to make money by seeking money on the streets and those who are in housing need. There is absolutely a very significant difference, and one is around organised crime, one is about needs. So I think it is important we separate that out. I'm a little disappointed in some of the responses, and I think partly because what we were trying to do as a housing scrutiny review was to reach out and to actually say, look, this isn't any one spatial scale, this isn't any one sphere of governance. What we need is collective collaborative leadership here. And to have a response back, well, it's down to the local authority planning officer. It comes back to, what do you want to be as a combined authority? Do you want to show strategic leadership? Do you want to fulfil the levelling up agenda and drive inclusive growth in this city, in this region? Because if you do, the current way that you operate by just seeking the housing numbers and administering grant in the way you do will not deliver that. You will just continue to replicate the failure in the system. And in listing out the many contradictions and conflicts that we came across just in a full day session, where we sat there and we just pulled out by the end of the day all of the things that come up, not least the government's viability test. The big, one of the biggest barriers is the viability test. Another one is we don't get any funding to do stuff with our existing stock. If we've got no land, actually changing the nature of our existing stock is an option. And if we do not own this challenge as a region and as local authority leaders, we fail our communities and citizens. So I'm sorry if this sounds strong, but we cannot continue to pretend we are addressing housing need or indeed the housing markets and the requirements of our region. And what we also know, and again came across, we're aware, and the affordable vehicle, I think, was an attempt to address that. We don't have the institutional arrangements that allow us to properly do it. What I said at the start was, in Michael Gove, we have Secretary of State, love him or loathe him, he's bright, he gets it, he understands system change, he understands the need for different institutional arrangements. And what we would ask, and what I would propose that this committee does, is we write up some of the, as a brief note of what we found in the review last Friday, reflecting on some of the things we've discussed today that colleagues have brought up, and we take that to the Combined Authority Board, and we actually ask the leadership and challenge the leadership of this Combined Authority, the collective leadership, to actually take this housing crisis seriously, because we have to move now, because we are failing generations.
Sorry, Peter, I'm going to have to draw it to a close because we really have.
I just wanted 30 seconds actually.
Okay.
30 seconds, just to say, Lisa, you and I, we've worked together on affordable housing, how much we want to see more. I like the 2.3 on here, looking forward to that. And you're absolutely right, because my mind is the words combined authority, and that is what we're all supposed to be working together, local and the combined authority together, to pull this forward. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Chair.
I think then, in summing up, what I would be saying in terms of agenda item 7 is about the collaboration, the emphasis on collaboration, and also I think the emphasis on the opportunity that the white paper, the Levelling Up white paper, presents within that collaborative work and within that pilot scheme. I think that's an ideal opportunity to be able to, really look at some of the issues that we've discussed. And in terms of recommendations for item 8, Councillor Fowler has already seconded Lisa's proposals, but the report goes to the board which is the final board meeting of this year, and outlines the comments that have been made, drawing together the conclusions from that meeting, requesting that the leadership writes to government and outlines the issues that we have as a combined authority. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that item. Thanks, Mike, for your attendance, and Gareth and Rob, thanks for your attendance. Very helpful.
Can I just thank Rob as well for his work on Friday? It was actually really good. One of the best scrutiny reviews I've done as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. We move on then swiftly to item 9, and I can see that Satish has joined us on Teams. This is an update item on the governance review and focusing on the independent remuneration panel. I had a brief conversation with Satish at the end of last week. I had requested a written report for this meeting because I just felt that having a written report in advance gives the committee the opportunity to think about and formulate the questions they would want to bring to it. But I do recognise some of the challenges that Satish may have had in terms of preparing a book of paper for the up and coming board. But anyway, we are where we are with it, and Satish is going to give us a brief verbal update before we move into questioning. Satish, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm grateful for being given the opportunity just to outline where we are with this. Chair, as you know, we had a governance review which completed its work late last year, and that just going for its final sort of check-in at the moment for the steering group. So we should be able to issue that very shortly. But you will be aware when I last came along that there was one of the recommendations that was flowing from it, partly as a result of the input from Scrutiny, was the whole issue of independent remuneration panel and looking at members' allowances in the organisation. Now, just to give you some background, we are meant to, as part of proper governance, look at the allowances for the mayor and deputy mayor every 4 odd years, and I think that's been slightly delayed. So that's a piece of work that we do need to do anyway. But in addition to that, on the back of the governance review, where a number of parts of the organisation made quite appropriate points in terms of the level of responsibility that we were putting on members across the board, particularly other members of the board and various other agencies, including Scrutiny and ARIC and so forth. So what we're hoping to do is, despite the fact that technically speaking, we should only really be looking at the mayor and deputy mayor allowances because that's what we're able to do under the order, I would quite like the terms of reference of the independent remuneration panel to pick up 2 other issues to the extent that it can do. And one of those issues will be the responsibilities of the other board members. Now, with this, I think what's likely to happen is what's happened now elsewhere up and down the country, where independent remuneration panels have made observations in relation to those responsibilities, and that then has been taken into account as part of constituent IRPs. So that will be sort of used by itself. But the third issue I'd like the panel to look at is issues in relation to TDC allowances, which is somewhat of an anomaly in the organisation, where we do pay allowances to TDC members. And this seems to have been a remnant from the old transport days, where when we took over the responsibilities, TDC became part of this organisation as a co-opted entity, and those members are deemed to be co-opted in that context. So they're paid allowances, but there is a whole issue about the appropriateness of fairness and just long-term issues in relation to those. So I'd like the independent remuneration panel, if we're going to have a one, is to pick up all 3 things. So the allowances of the mayor and the deputy mayor, other allowances of the board members, and so wider issues in relation to TDC and responsibilities, including Scrutiny and ARIC. So that's the terms of reference we're hoping to put together. In terms of the composition of the panel, last time the allowances were looked at in the organisation, they were looked at by Professor Steve Leach from De Montfort University. So we're in the process at the moment, just talking to him to see whether he'd be prepared to chair the panel again. and these details will be in the report that will go to board. If he's not able to do it, then one of his associates who's recently done the work at Manchester would be appropriate to chair the panel. And the other two members, we are in discussions with the respective chairs of the independent remuneration panels of both Wolverhampton and Birmingham, both of which we shall just at the moment finalising or have reported on their IRPs. So that's what we're hoping to do in terms of the independent remuneration panel composition. And as the last point I wanted to make was in terms of timescales, I think it would be quite good. It's somewhat ambitious, but to try and get all three parts of the work done for the June board, because I think that's a neat thing to do. It may be difficult to do that, particularly in relation to the TDC and other wider responsibility allowances, because part of the fact that that's a little bit more fraught with difficulties, there's also some issues around what we do in terms of transport governance. So there is a parallel review that we're hoping to undertake shortly in relation to how member decision making takes place in the whole area of transport in the way that we did on economic governance. So there's a neatness about doing that review first. I'd like to be able to get that review done in the next 6 to 8 weeks, and then the independent remuneration panel look at issues in relation to that. So that's what I wanted to say in terms of reference, those three areas, the composition of the panel and also the timescales.
Thanks for the update, Satish. I mean, you'll know from the conversation you and I had last week that I would expect this committee to make recommendations along the lines of the panel reporting back on all three aspects by June. And I think the fact that we've got Laura, I'll bring you in a second, Bob. I have got your hand, I'll bring you in a second. And I think the fact that we've got Laura here, so in terms of if there is an issue with resource to complete this piece of work, if it's a resource issue, as Laura's here, I don't know whether you'd be in a position, Laura, to make sure that that resource is available to complete that piece of work so that a report can be made back by June, ready for the start of the next municipal year.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it's a resource issue. It's I think it's just an officer time. But I think Satish has set out a process by which we can do 3 different things, plus looking at the transport governance altogether in a way that means that when it does come forward, we'll have a nice set of recommendations that we don't have to unpick to do another review, if that makes sense. So it's important, I think, that the time frame that Satish has set out and the approach to integrating those pieces of work is done properly.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that it's critical that it's done properly. It's been going on far too long. We made the original recommendations, I think, back in 2019 from both the governance review and from the transport review. So it has been going on a very long time, which is why I'm keen, or this committee will be keen, that actually it is concluded by June, because it's already been going on for far too long. I'm going to bring Councillor Grinsell in first, then Councillor Trickett. So Councillor Grinsell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. But I think at this point I should declare that I am a member of the TDC, the Transport Delivery Committee. I am also lead member on one of the member engagements group within that TDC, and just want to make you privy to that. Aside from to say that the work that TDC does is particularly onerous. In fact, today is one of the very first days that I've not had a meeting in regards to any TDC work. But I wanted to make it clear, and I won't be giving any further input. And thank you for your time, Chair. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for making it clear. And can I make it really clear from the committee's point of view that this has never been about attacking TDC or singling TDC out. What it is about is a fairness and a transparency across the board. And when we made the recommendations at Transport Scrutiny Review, it was about actually, we didn't care who got an allowance or who didn't get an allowance. What was important was that there was a parity of esteem across the board. And given the fact that the TDC was an inherited position, an inherited allowance that I think was last set back in 2012, 2013 under the old arrangements, it's absolutely about time that that it was looked at in the round, and this is the perfect opportunity to do so. So thank you for your comments, Councillor Gwinsell. Councillor Trippitt.
Thank you. I think Kathy has said many of the things, but I think this is really an important issue in terms of the maturity of the combined authority. 2019, there was a governance review and there was the review into transport. It was agreed through both of those reviews that actually the anomaly between what the Transport Delivery Committee did and actually the broader requirements of the transport policy and issues within this region were actually not clear. And actually we needed to realign Transport Delivery Committee. It was also agreed that our governance was not efficient and effective in the way it actually ensured that the understanding of local authorities was properly brought forward into the combined authority. What I seem to have, we agreed that the governance review would be held over. It was held over because of the mayoral elections. It was then held over because of COVID. So I will accept a year taken out. But we met with you, Satish, right at the start of this year. We were clear that this needed to be resolved this year. We were clear that actually in a new mayoral term being succeeded, coming through, it was really important that mayor actually had some coherence of governance and clear transparency for this next term, and it's continued not to be delivered. So it is not an acceptable delay in my mind, and I worry, and I appreciate there are challenges, but the TDC continuing as it does is a fudge. And if we continue to fudge things, we will continue to fail in our leadership. And it is absolutely critical that we understand how the different groups, how the different interests coalesce and ensure that we do have a system that reflects other combined authorities rather than historical patronage issues arising from different bodies.
Satish, do you want to come back on anything that's been said so far?
Oh, I sort of agree that obviously there has been a delay in relation to that. I don't know the history of this. I wasn't around, and I don't think Laura was in the role she's currently carrying out either. But so I do accept that there has been a delay on this, and we really should have been looking at the issue of the mayor and the deputy mayor's allowance together with the other issues which have been outlined. But I think we are where we are. I think the important thing now is to make sure that we have a proper review which looks at it properly in a timely and efficient way, but also gives all the parts of the organisation to make representations in relation to it. Because the TDC allowance is, I don't need to tell you all in a sense, right, is actually fraught with many difficulties in a sense, right? And there are some interests involved there as well. So we just need to manage that whole process in the proper way. I wouldn't want that to delay the work that really does need to happen in relation to the mayor and deputy mayor's allowance, because that really, under the statute, should be doing something. And as I say, despite the fact that there hasn't been a delay on this, I'd like to think that we could get this work done for June. So leave it with me. As Laura says, we've made the arrangements in relation to the panel and its resourcing and so forth. So I feel reasonably confident that we can work relatively swiftly with this.
Thanks. Do I have any other members who wish to comment before we sum up? No? Okay, then, so I think the endorsement I'd be looking from today's meeting for scrutiny is that the report that goes to CA board on the 18th reflects scrutiny's position that whilst acknowledging it needs to be a full and proper review into the arrangements, because we absolutely need to do that, that we still expect that a report will go to the first board meeting in June, which will set the new municipal year and actually be the right time to put those governance arrangements in place for the first full year. So can I seek scrutiny's support on that recommendation?
Yeah, I think,
Agreed. Thank you very much. So thanks for that. Thank you, Satish. Obviously, you're welcome to stay online if you want to, but I'm sure you've got other things that you need to be getting on with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move swiftly on then. So apologies, we're running a little late, Ed, as I knew we would. So do apologise about that. But we're moving on then to item 10, which is the Trailblazer devolution deal. And if at the outset I can draw people's attention to the second recommendation. So just to keep in mind as Eddie's talking, the areas of the Trailblazer devolution deal that Scrutiny may wish to pay closer attention to in the coming years. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask how long we've got for this item, if given that you're running behind? Do you want me to try and catch you up, or because I've got a presentation I could share on the screen with everybody if you wanted me to, but I don't know how long you want for this item. Right, we're at 11:10 now. We've still got the levelling up white paper to take, the levelling up white paper, the growth one to take as well from afterwards. So perhaps if we could conclude by past. I think then in that case I won't share my presentation. Okay. I'll just talk to the paper if that's okay. All right with you. Fine. So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you about I'm going to say a few words about the levelling up white paper generally, and then specifically to talk about the Trailblazer devolution deal, because I think it's important to put this devolution deal in the proper context of levelling up and what the government is seeking to do in that respect. People will have seen at the beginning of February, government published the levelling up white paper. It defined levelling up in a number of ways. In particular, it defined it in relation to opportunity and the fact that while talent might be spread evenly across the country, opportunity is not, and that's a basic unfairness that needs to be challenged. But it particularly looked at it from a spatial point of view and identified that for far too long now, the gaps between different regions have been growing, and even within regions, those gaps are growing as well. And so we need to do something to tackle the inequalities that we see across the country. The white paper was interesting insofar as it had some really quite significant sections of analysis for the first 100 pages. It was a 323 page document. And the first half of it really is analysis. And I do think it's important just to flag a couple of things about that analysis, because it's not what you might normally expect from a government document, and it wasn't, I don't think, particularly picked up by the media. And perhaps the most important thing to say in this context is that it explicitly challenges a lot of the economic orthodoxy that has led us to where we are now. And it therefore suggests that we need a different type of economic growth model if we're going to be able to address the disparities that we see between and within regions. And it explains, I think there's two things worth flagging in this analysis. First of all, that far too many of our efforts historically have been too short term and too specific, and therefore we need to focus much more on what is described in the white paper as systems change, which is longer term and more sustainable. And it in particular talks about 6 different types of capital that we need to focus on in a systemic way if we're going to make the kind of change that we want to see. So with all due respect to Jonathan to my left, an exclusive focus on innovation, for example, is not going to cut the mustard. An exclusive focus on transport infrastructure is not going to work. We're going to have to make sure we have a much more joined up approach to the way in which we're trying to tackle economic disparities. The other thing that the white paper does in its analysis section is to spell out 12 missions. And again, these missions are interesting insofar as they are diverse. These are 12 things that need to be levelled up by 2030 if we're going to achieve what the government wanting us to. In fact, it sets itself these 12 missions as its own challenges by 2030. Some of them are around economic issues, some of them are around, you can call it public services, some of them are around communities and places, and some of them are around local leadership. They're all listed there in the paper, I think, for you. The particularly interesting is the kind of local leadership piece, because what the white paper does is specifically identify local institutions and local leadership, and explicitly mayoral combined authorities as being absolutely critical to the task of levelling up. That then brings me to some of the policy dimensions of the white paper, which were, I think, criticised fairly fully in the media when it was launched, in so far as they were considered to be insubstantive and that there wasn't enough money attached to them. To be clear, the money, on the money side of things, the white paper effectively says that the comprehensive spending review set out the spending parameters for levelling up, and the different government departments then, having received their allocations at the spending review, are then challenged to allocate their funding in order to achieve these levelling up objectives. So it's not that there was no money, it's that the money was already set out for the departments, and now we need to challenge those departments to make sure it's spent in the appropriate way. So a whole range of different policy ideas. I think we counted about 120 altogether, ranging from economy to housing to transport to community issues. It's a whole range of things there, and I haven't got time this morning to go through 120 different policy ideas with you, you'll be pleased to know. But potentially the biggest idea, and certainly the focus of this conversation now this morning, is that the West Midlands and Greater Manchester have been identified as those mayoral combined authorities that are, if you like, at the cutting edge of the kind of changes that the government wants to see. And therefore we have been assigned the status, if you like, of being able to strike what is being called a trailblazer devolution deal with government. So many areas of the country, including those that don't have any combined authority at the moment, are being encouraged to get on the first step of the ladder and strike devolution deals themselves. But Greater Manchester and West Midlands have been given this special status whereby nothing is off the table in terms of what it is we might want to negotiate with government. And just sort of recalling the housing conversation that I've just eavesdropped, it may well be that there are issues to do with housing where we could go to government and say, in order to make our situation better in the West Midlands, these are the kind of special dispensations, if you like, that we might want to see for the West Midlands in order to address some of those issues. So what we've done, just very quickly, since the white paper has been published, and the government has still not given us any timetable for this. So we are effectively making up our own timetable, which at the moment ministers and officials have not pushed back on. We told them what we're planning. And so this could well be the timetable, but I can't be 100% sure of it. Is that what we'll try to do is between now and June, come up with a set of propositions that will be, if you like, the West Midlands offer, stroke ask of government, that will take to the Combined Authority Board in June, and then between June and the summer recess we'll aim to negotiate with government. I mean, I should say there are parallel conversations going with departments all the time, but that will be a kind of period of negotiation. We hope to get a headline deal then sorted out before summer recess, after which we can then work on the detail ahead of the autumn fiscal event, so that by then we'll have the kind of final detail. Just by way of process, we've set up 20 different work streams. I don't know whether we'll be able to sustain 20 work streams, for too long. Some of them might come together, some might drop off, but we thought to start off with, if the government's saying that there's nothing that's off the table, we should be broad and we should be ambitious in the kind of things that we'd like to see devolved. again, I think those work streams are listed in your paper. We've got work stream leads. We're working very closely with local authority officer groups in terms of how we develop those. And we have suggested a decision-making process whereby ideas come up through the thematic work streams into what we're calling a devolution strategy group, which will be primarily the local authority chief executives, and then on through the combined authority board to a high-level negotiating team led by the mayor. Again, there's a diagram in the report which sets that process out. And then finally to say we're doing our best to be as open and communicative as possible around this process. So we're doing briefings all over the place and very happy to come and do briefings both here and take questions here and indeed in your local authorities if that's appropriate as well. Really to make sure that everybody feels that particularly at this beginning part of the process, they all have a say as to what could possibly go on the table for the Trailblazer devolution deal. Is that okay for now?
Thanks for that whistle stop too, Ed. Okay, I'll open it up then to committee to ask questions of Ed. Is there who wants to kick off? Thanks, Charlie. Yep.
Thank you. I've been looking at this presentation, the report here, and I'm looking at the 6 capitals you've mentioned here, and you've also mentioned that in your presentation. One of the capitals is the human capital. Is that where the leaderships come in, the local leaderships? If so, then how will if you're talking about the local leadership, is that in line with the general public? So if they are involved, then how are you going to make them aware of these projects and for them to get involved? And also, if this has been going on, I mean, I don't know the timescales of this, how long it's going on. Have you had any obstructions? Have there been any delays? And also, again, I'm from Coventry, so I just wanted to see how Coventry is involved in this. Thank you.
So there's a number of things to tease out there. So in terms of the capitals, the 6 different capitals, human capital tends to refer to skills and education and those kind of things. So it's the extent to which we've got the right skills and the right level of skills. That's the kind of focus of what human capital is about. The leadership piece tends to sit under the institutional capital, the 6th bit of capital they talk about, and that's making sure we've got the right institutions that and the right governance structures and so on. So that's just to explain the capitals, but I think your point was probably more importantly about how we involve communities in some of this work. And I think my response to that is twofold. First of all, unless you tell me otherwise, I'm not immediately aware of communities all around the West Midlands clamouring to be part of a conversation about a devolution deal, but I am very aware of communities around the West Midlands saying enough is enough in terms of the inequalities that we see in our neighbourhoods. And I think somehow or other, we as officers and you as politicians need to be thinking really hard as to how we make the link between the two. So I'll be honest, there is no formal public engagement and consultation process about the Trailblazer devolution deal, but there is, I think, a big opportunity for all of us, whether it's in our housing directorate, our transport directorate, our work on public service reform and so on, to be thinking much more carefully about how we involve our communities in some of these really important conversations. You might remember last year we held a citizens panel on community recovery precisely because we needed to make sure that citizens' voices were part of that process. And so I'm very committed as part of this to try and make sure that we get citizens' voices feeding through into the substantive issues, even if not into the deal negotiation process, if that makes sense. And I think that's really going to be really important as we move forward. And then just, I think you asked Specifically about delays, no, there's not been any delays at this point. Government have not been particularly forthcoming about the timetable, but we're cracking on with it anyway and taking the initiative ourselves. And then in terms of Coventry, I mean, the specific answer is that I've had 2 conversations with Martin Reeves about the whole process, and he seems very happy with how it's moving forward. I think, again, there are lots of opportunities for Coventry to get involved in those thematic work streams and to bring forward the kind of issues that people in Coventry are going to want to see in the Devo deal.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I think what I'm coming to understand over the years is that actually local authorities and the CA are generally poor in public engagement. And you're quite right in communities have had enough, but they don't make the link between the decisions that are made either at a local, regional or national level impact. Those are the really important decisions that actually change things for them and how they need to shape them. So I think that's a really critical piece that we need to really concentrate on about how we get this right. Because you're right, nobody's going to be interested in the word devolution deal, but people will be interested in what can come into their community to make a difference for them, how they can get a new job, how they can upskill. So I think there's opportunities, but I think we have to keep that at the forefront.
If I may just say, I think our transport colleagues are best at this at the moment. They've got more sophisticated processes in relation to transport engagement. I think that we've got some big opportunities though to do this much better. Councillor Trickett, I think, knows and is leading some of the work on how we engage people in retrofit initiatives in East Birmingham.
Claire, I'm doing that in a professional capacity.
Yeah, but it's a good way of it's a great example of how we link people to the substantive issues that are going to cut their fuel bills, going forward. So we've got to be better at it.
Thank you, Councillor Waters.
I think it would be a good idea to actually take it out into the communities. Now, in Warsaw, we've got something called the PRO programme, and we've actually linked a lot of our community associations together. So in Warsaw, such as Warsaw, it wouldn't be that hard to actually engage with the community groups to actually put on sessions and do surveys or whatever to see what the community actually, what's something. I don't know about other areas, how hard it could be actually to do that, but it is for the residents to be able to have their say, and that's important.
Thanks for that, Vera, absolutely. So anybody else who's got any comments at the moment? Councillor Trickett.
Okay, number of observations. I think I truly welcomed the levelling up paper to actually reflect back again the importance of a spatial context being applied to policy. And actually, it's only when you actually understand how policy, be it transport, homelessness, digital, how it all plays out in a given place, you actually truly understand the impact on inequality. So I truly, truly welcome that. I'm slightly concerned that the 20 work streams actually do not necessarily then play out into an understanding of the differential spatial contexts within the combined authority, and actually the importance of understanding what's distinct and different and the level of that distinction and difference between different parts of the combined authority will be critical to our ability to level up. So I suppose I'm quite keen that for anything that happens is people play out, what does this mean for Coventry? What does this mean for Solihull, Birmingham, the Black Country? What does this mean for us at this spatial scale? I think that we need to put those challenges to ourselves. I am vain enough to be absolutely chuffed to see capitals being referenced. I spent many years on my place shaping research demanding capitals do play out. I was really shocked at the level that we were seen to have low social capital. And again, I think that is something that we need to dig deeper down into, because it possibly actually also shows that for some of our left behind areas, some of our more traditional outer lying areas in the Black Country, parts of Birmingham, certainly what we found in lockdown, that it was, actually, if you were in need and deprived, it's far better to be in the inner city where there was an established good community network through faith groups than in a peripheral estate where actually there was very little. So again, I think we really need to dig down into what that social capital is. And then I suppose my final 2 points is, I don't know if you heard or saw what I was referencing in terms of what we found with the housing review. The big thing for me is we can get all the powers we want and all the funding, but unless we truly and honestly own the challenges this region faces, we will waste them. And that absolute importance of really grasping the challenges we face are really, really key. And I think, again, in that I will be interested to see what happens with the growth strategy, because you've got to balance out your social and your environmental with your ability to actually grow. We're an industrial heritage. The legacy of inequality we have, if we put too much emphasis on growth, you truly limit your ability to address the social and the environment. And we need to understand that and actually understand the trade-offs that we need to apply. And that requires a really honest conversation, because again, what the Levelling Up paper you reference in your paper is, you know, system change, it ain't sexy, but it's that hard yards that will actually turn this region around. But it's generally welcome.
Ed, do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, all helpful comments, thank you. I'll just sort of in reverse order, just on that final point about owning the challenges that we face. What's been really interesting already in relation to the work streams is that we've been asking colleagues to start to think about devolution asks, if you like, of government, but in the context of levelling up. So we can't just simply, as we might have done with previous devolution deals, say we want X, Y, and Z because we want it. It's because this is going to help the region level up. And I think that's throwing some of our kind of, if you like, traditional policy asks into a different light and causing us to think about different ways of arguing for them or dropping them altogether. So that's the first thing. Just in terms of social capital, absolutely fascinating data in the white paper. We definitely need to dig down and understand it better. So I think we're going to need to commission some work to do that and really get to the bottom of that. And then your comments about spatial context and the importance of place. I share your concerns about the work streams being too, if you like, thematic, and we'll need somehow to make sure they do connect with places. But if I may, that's a problem we've got to try and solve ourselves in the region. The challenge we've got with government is actually that they don't really care about those places. Because we're trying to argue a case with government to give us the powers we need so that we can join it together in place. So it's almost a step removed from that. But I think it's the right challenge. I'm not sure our Devo deal ultimately is going to be the way in which we address those sort of smaller place-based issues.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Fowler, Councillor Padder, and then we'll draw it to a conclusion. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Pleased to see the Levelling Up white paper on the full briefing note here, which I've read through. And I can say, well, about time this Levelling Up, because we've been waiting for this for a long, long time. And when they talked about it pre sort of election time, I was expecting it to come to like 12 months afterwards, so it's not before time. But I certainly welcome those 12 missions, Chair, that I've seen, and also these 20 work streams. I'll be interested to know how that's going to work for us all together to join in. I think certainly with the combined authority, the local authorities, and certainly, yes, if we can get it out to the public, I think that's very helpful, as long as it's in clarity, because a lot of people actually, with such busy lives, it's almost just get on with it. You know, I just want to see an improvement to my life, my family's life, and the area that I live in. And I do, as I say, like the 20 work streams, and the 3 that I highlighted was the human and social capital, and also the connection, because it all sort of feeds in to what we talked about before on the housing, about all those to bringing it together. So I very much welcome this, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Padder.
Yes, I guess I'm not actually too hung up on the number of work streams, and for me, it's health, education, employment, housing, and transport. That's I look at as the mainstreams, and like in all the boroughs in the combined authority, each borough would think the other one's getting a better deal. So we need to be more level and apparent, and this is where the connection with the community comes in. And as Councillor Walter said, one doesn't fit all. I'll give you an example. When during the pandemic, my own borough, Sandwell, and with the case of this dreadful pandemic was compared to more affluent boroughs, and we're saying, why is this happening? Well, obviously, in my borough, people are having to go to work to then earn their earnings and so on. But in the more richer boroughs, they can stay at home and work from home. So that's something that we need to level up. So please, yeah, I'm not, I said good work streams, and as Councillor Ali said, let's put them on timely scales and have gateways to make sure that we're all on time and hitting the right targets. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think just to sum up then, and one of the things we asked at the start was about the Trailblazer devolution deal and powers that this committee would want oversight of going forward. So, I mean, one of the three of the areas that we haven't looked at or discussed is the powers relating to the PCC, powers relating to public health, and fire. Now, I think just a very quick comment, just a really quick answer from you, Ed, would be really helpful for me. Are the powers relating to public health, would that be given the national changes around the public health setup? Will public health, are you anticipating public health will be removed from local authorities and the responsibility in terms of powers could be devolved to you, or will it still sit with local authorities and the CA would have some sort of overarching responsibility?
The honest answer is we don't know.
Okay.
And we have asked for further clarity
Okay.
from government about what that little sentence, there's only one sentence in 323 pages, says about a duty for mayoral combined authorities to improve the health of their populations. But I think we've established as a principle in the West Midlands that and it's in the paper, that we are not going to suck powers up from local authorities. This is all about what powers we can draw down. So working on that principle, I don't see that we would be seeking to take on public health duties that are currently in the remit of local authorities. But we are just trying to get clearance, trying to get clarity from government about what it means about that.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. So I'm suggesting then certainly for the work stream for this committee going forward, I would suggest that this committee may well want further discussion and oversight around possible powers for PCC, because of course that came before this committee a few years ago when it was last discussed, and it was the decision was taken not to pursue that. So I think the committee would probably want further oversight on that if it were to be a possibility, along with what are the powers that could become clear as we move forward. But I certainly think they want to have a clear view around the actively involving communities and how that work is going. And I think it's about doing with rather than to. That's what I was picking up from the committee. And also around the links around with spatial capital. So have I missed anything in terms of what this committee may want further oversight of going forward? Okay, we agree with that then. Thank you very much for your presentation, Ed. Sorry, Jonathan, we're coming to you now. I bet you thought we'd never get to you. So hand it over to Jonathan Skinner then to take the paper on agenda item 11 on the West Midlands Plan for Growth. So over to yourself, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Chair. So there's quite a lot in the report, and I know we've included a link as well because we thought we might be pushed tightly for time. So I just wanted to draw out three main points really to kind of frame some of this discussion, and then very happy to answer questions on some of the details. Firstly, I wanted to explain a little bit about what the focus of the Plan for Growth work is, and also kind of in defining that, what it very expressly isn't. So para 2.3 of the report talks about the kind of difficult economic forecasted position out to 2030. And so one of the exam questions that we set ourselves was about how the region can try and catalyse additional growth above those kind of forecasted levels to return to the trajectory that we previously saw as the fastest growing region outside London. And that if we need to base that on some of those industrial clusters where the region has really strong comparative advantage and there is private sector investment confidence. What this piece of work isn't through the Plan for Growth is a kind of rewriting an overhaul of our kind of wholesome economic strategy. And so you'll see in the report it expressly talks about areas where we need to do further work, particularly in some of those kind of foundational aspects of our local economies that are really important to different places, but that is in some ways no less important, but distinct from the focus of the Plan for Growth activity. The second element that I draw out from this work is about just how important the responses that the combined authority and partners have, and this goes back to some of the system leadership issues that Ed and colleagues have been talking about before. That in looking at those areas of potential additional cluster growth, we've identified a series of 6 interventions. But what came through really strongly was that those interventions are all well and good in their own right, but it's how they are aligned, coordinated, and integrated that's really important, making sure that they're sequenced properly and resourced appropriately based on the scale of need across those different clusters. And so the Economic Growth Board, which has kind of provided oversight of all of this work, initiated a kind of a related bit of work to look at how the economic leadership institutions across the region lead on the different functions of economic development. So this is including partners like LEPs, like universities, like local authorities. And the decision was made at the start of February to initiate a short task group that would work with the direction of the Levelling Up White Paper in understanding how the region can bring better coherence across all of that activity to ensure that then when we do act around those 6 interventions, and as Ed and others have alluded to, hopefully with additional powers and resources that we need, that those are really properly aligned and done on a proper system basis. And then that takes me to the, I guess, final element that I just wanted to flag up, which is about some of the next steps on this activity. So the Economic Growth Board has endorsed the overall kind of direction of this piece of work, but that it is subject to this further additional kind of detail that we need to work out on some of those aspects of economic leadership. We also are listening to input from others like the Scrutiny Committee and other partners, and that then with the initial endorsement of the Economic Growth Board, that will be taken through to the Combined Authority Board, which will make a decision on this later in the year. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for that. And I think one that's coming out loud and clear for me this morning across each of the presentations is the big thing of collaboration. And no, none of us can do anything in isolation. You know, the catalyst of the white paper that brings the opportunities in for everything else, and making sure that those are all aligned. I hope everybody had the opportunity to look at this short clip on YouTube, because I think that answered a lot, or the long clip on YouTube, as Councillor Lumby studiously did. I think it was really helpful, and I think it answered actually a lot of the questions that I had, because I read your paper first and then watched the clip, so it actually answered a lot of the things for me. So, Councillor Trickies.
So I think there's a problem with this paper and how it actually then relates to your ambitions for levelling up, because actually I don't believe this paper offers the new economic context that is required. It doesn't challenge the current economic orthodoxy, it just carries on much in the same. lo and behold, we see professional financial services way up there again. We see all the sexy kind of high job value, high growth, rather than actually what you refer to as the foundational jobs, the actual jobs that people currently occupy. And when you start to look at what you're prioritising, you're ignoring that with automation, with Brexit, with zero carbon, a lot of those jobs in some of the manufacturing, so you refer to aerospace and the electric light vehicles, those aren't going to be jobs for people who are actually in need. They are going to be jobs at high levels and will actually have a high degree of automation. So you will bring growth, you will get high value added, but you will not secure the inclusive growth. You will not secure the social, neither will you critically build the markets that allow for retrofit. Professionally, I'm trying to work out how on earth you can actually sell retrofit to a to pay market, where actually it doesn't pay back at the moment, and it's not the first thing you think of when you're investing in your house. You're more likely to think of your kitchen than your roof, your PV. How actually we address the absolute need to retrofit stock that we have no powers over, and how you actually refit this region. And one of the things we're very clear about is the only way we are going to grow this market is if we intervene directly. And one of the things the research all points to is what you almost need to start. You've got it in Warsaw. You've got a factory for advanced housing manufacturing. It is able to do wraparounds. Maybe what we should be doing is seeking to grow the capacity to have that as an area of expertise in our region. But instead, you push the retrofit and stuff down into a lower level. You have the manufacture of future housing, but again, it's not as a direct investment to address the housing need. It is into that high level. So this feels like an innovation strategy, and where you are pursuing easy growth rather than the inclusive growth. And I am really tired of sitting around and watching recommendations consistently come forward that says we have to carry on pursuing these high areas because it's worked. The focus on professional financial services has not worked for our cities and region. There is nowhere that you could say that emphasis has addressed inequality. So I think you've got your sectors right. I think it's your balance of emphasis. And actually, what do we fundamentally, if we're going to address zero carbon, housing need, what do we need to invest in? So it's that balancing your objectives. And I think you've seen this in a silo of growth, and you need to take it back and look at it through a silo of levelling up.
Do you think it's London-centric the way you're talking?
Totally London-centric.
Can I just respond to that? Because that's exactly what Jonathan said at the beginning of his presentation, that this is not an economic strategy that's trying to do all. This is a very specific piece of work that was commissioned to look at one aspect of strategy. And one of the things he referenced is something that we as a leadership team feel really strongly about, that this is one bit of a strategy. It is not the whole strategy. So I think we would absolutely agree with you, but that was if you go back and look at the commission, that is exactly what it was commissioned to do. But it is not an economic strategy, because as you point out, and as Jonathan pointed out, it doesn't even begin to talk about the rest of the economy. So it was a very specific piece of work commissioned to do a very specific thing, and that is why it has delivered in the way that it has. So I just want to set that out. It is in no way, shape, or form the end of the work that we need to do about how we set our regional economy. It does not pick up the foundational economy. It does not pick up a huge, probably a bigger percentage of the jobs that people in this region do. And it was not addressed. It was not set out to think regionally about inclusive growth. All that work is still to come. So I don't disagree with what you've said, Councillor, but I just want to be very clear that that is what we commissioned, that is what we were asked to commission by the Economic Growth Board. That is what was done, but it's not the full story, and we don't think it is the full story. So I hope that's helpful. Jonathan, I'm sure, can comment or pick up the detail, but I think that's why when he started, he was saying, let's be really clear what this isn't. And it's not the piece of work that I think we all agreed does still need to be done.
Jonathan?
I think I agree with both comments. This is what it is. It emits, and what I kind of set out at the start, that is absolutely vital. All I suppose I would say is that I think some of the kind of levers of change for aspects of that kind of foundational economy, I think actually go into some of the areas that we are really keen to explore through the Trailblazer devolution approach, particularly where kind of the place lens about some of those decision powers that kind of central government has, particularly around certain aspects of kind of wage policy, for example, and kind of employment terms, and that aspect of the labour market has much more bite in those areas than much more precise elements of kind of, as Councillor Trickett said, some of this kind of innovation heavy activity. So I think that there is a connection there, and that certainly through that piece of work, which is linked to this, these are kind of all pieces of the same jigsaw, but that we need to be able to bring them together, not just with the kind of scrutiny committee, so it understands the kind of, that overall picture for the jigsaw, but also for our kind of business base and communities out in the region too. And that's something that I think we're really acutely aware of.
Thank you. I think then that we as a committee would express concern that the work is that it's separated out, because obviously it feels that you've commissioned this one, or this piece of work has been commissioned by the Inclusive Growth Board. Not saying you've commissioned it, Jonathan, but this piece of work has been commissioned by the board, and it's obviously focused on very specific areas. And I think Councillor Trickett's point around the inclusive growth is that how can you address one without the other? And how are you going to address one without the other? How are you going to ensure that those pieces of work are meshed together to ensure that the inclusive growth does eventually run through the whole plan for growth that the combined authority should have, because it should be a strategy for growth that straddles both sets, shouldn't it, rather than it just being the one stream. So I think that would be a concern for us as a committee. Do I have any other comments before we draw this one to a close? Councillor Paddock?
Just an observation for economic and growth. Before, when we were part of Europe, we used to trade quite freely. And recently, a lot of the industries moved abroad for costs and so on. My fear is for the semiconductor industry. And I used to work for Jaguar Land Rover, and I've heard that we have lost a lot of business because of the unavailability of semiconductors. Should we look at bring those semiconductor industry back into the UK? I mean, at the moment, we're relying on France, I believe, and everything is being electronized. And I'm wearing 2 watches, so semiconductors and everything. And we seem to be relying on people outside UK when we are at the leading edge of technology ourselves. Thank you.
Sure, I think, I mean, the impact of some of the trade frictions that have been introduced, I think, are well covered and was part of the evidence base for this work. On the particular issue of kind of semiconductors, I know it's been an incredibly kind of difficult challenge for lots of industries, particularly automotive. I think actually the kind of overall global, I'm not sure particularly where kind of JLR sources its semiconductors from, but I think the overall global supply, which is kind of heavily dependent on the Far East and particularly Taiwan, that's a kind of overall massive global challenge. But certainly within that, there are opportunities because places are ultimately looking to kind of reshore some of that activity to add some resilience into those supply chains. So there is, I think, lots. but it's probably broader than semiconductors into a number of other areas where people are looking to kind of reshore those supply chains.
Okay, thanks very much for that, and thanks for your time, Jonathan, in presenting that report. And I think the only note that we will pick up from that is the concern about the need to make sure that social, that inclusive growth actually runs through everything we do, because if we don't, then the levelling up agenda is a nonsense, and we're not going to be able to do that for our communities across the region. So thanks very much for that. Laura?
Chair, just apologies. I need to thank you very much for having me at the meeting. We have a staff consultation starting at 12 o'clock, so I am going to have to leave you so I can go and do that.
Yeah,
I just wanted to thank you for having me here today, and it's great to see everybody in person, actually. And I look forward to doing that going forward more.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome, and I think it's always useful to have you here. You know, you've managed to pick up on a couple of really important points, and it's good to have that clarity, I think. So thank you. Okay, we will move on then. We are going to run over, I'm afraid, folks, so hopefully not by too much. But we'll now move on to item 12, and Fiona, I'm going to bring you in on the annual business plan.
Good morning, thank you. I have a few slides to share with you to run through the annual business plan and talk a little bit about the process, the timeline, and how we're going to be monitoring that. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
No, you can't. It doesn't work.
No sharing yet. There we go.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah, just about.
Start from the beginning. So I wanted to provide the Overview and Scrutiny Committee today with a little bit of background to the development of the annual business plan, talk about the overview of the content and how it will be monitored and measured and reported. And this is a process where we're setting out to support data-driven, evidence-based decision-making by providing robust data on how we're performing. So this first slide is a glimpse of the soon-to-be published annual business plan. It's a snapshot of how the aims, objectives and high-level deliverables will be shown throughout the document. The plan is to share the annual business plan later today. It does contain details of an organisation restructure, which is being announced by Laura Schoaf at 12 noon today, hence why it is coming out after the meeting, so apologies for that. The annual business plan has an internal audience. The high-level deliverables were agreed by February Combined Authority Board within the budget return, and this was the culmination of many months of work of gathering the activity across the Combined Authority, and we did this to have a look at what was the projects that were being delivered, what was the business as usual, also if there were any COVID specific work, but we also looked at the aspirations. If another funding stream were to be announced, what is the aspirational work that we would also hope to be able to achieve? And obviously that's not in here, but it was gathered as an opportunity so that we can be flexible in our approach. In my paper, the aim was to give the Overview and Scrutiny Committee visibility of what's been produced and also provide you with some assurance on how performance will be monitored and reported. So this next slide talks in more detail how we plan to do that. I actually came to Overview and Scrutiny Committee last year in September to share with you plans for a new reporting tool, which is progressing well. So underneath all of the HLDs, there are profiled milestones, and we've profiled those by month, and we are sharing that information with our finance colleagues so that we can, every milestone is linked to a cost code. So when we start reporting against the annual business plan, so the first report will go to SLT in May this year, it will contain a visually rich dashboard. We're using Power BI to be able to present a red, amber, green rated view, and that will go right from aim through objective and high level deliverable down to those milestone levels. So people viewing that, we'll be able to see, and we'll be able to see the RAG rating, but also to be able to dig deeper into more detail about actual projects. Alongside the real-time dashboard, which will be triangulated with the strategic risk register and also the finance cost codes, we'll also be providing a monthly report to the strategic leadership team. That will be produced by my team. It will have analysis undertaken against the data that we receive. So it will be able to show trends and be able to highlight where there are issues that might need additional resources, for example. This is all part of the idea of having a single version of the truth, hence why it will be triangulated and why we'll be pulling data directly from systems and spreadsheets across the business. It reduces the opportunity for human error or double counting, and actually reduces the time if we're pulling directly from systems. We'll also be producing mid-year and outturn reporting to the Wmca board. So we generally take something in June every year, and then again in the period between September and November. Alongside the work that we're doing on the reporting tool, my team are also developing a roadmap to a performance management culture. So at the moment, we have very much a monitoring and reporting culture, and we want to move that towards improving so that we have very clear targets about what we should be achieving, and then ultimately to that performance management approach so that we use data to make those evidence-based decisions. My final slide talks about the process that we are planning for the next financial year. So we've got a really good foundation now. The annual business plan sets out all of the activity that we aim to be delivering in 22-23. What we want to do is continue those conversations that have been incredibly valuable and had lots and lots of engagement from our strategic leadership team, our corporate management team, and heads of service across the business. So the aim is, instead of having a once a year conversation around the business plan and activity that aligns with finance, what we're planning to do is have more regular engagement, utilising both the finance and HR business partners so that we can provide the information around performance and have a look at how teams are performing, have regular conversations around finance, so it's not just a once a year budget conversation, but also include workforce. This is where HR come in, and we can have a look in more depth at what are the skills that we need to be able to deliver, what is the talent that we have in the organisation, and where there's flexibility to be more agile in our approach and move the talent to where it is most needed. These regular conversations also provide the flexibility if there are additional funding streams. So we're well aware of levelling up and CRSTS, which is coming in this year. But previous years, we've had pots of funding that we've been able to bid for. And this more agile approach means that we can have that flexibility because we understand both where the finances are, but also where our people are. So ultimately, this annual business plan provides a solid foundation with that flexibility that we can respond a lot more effectively to new opportunities, but also to challenges. Happy to take questions.
Thanks very much for your presentation, Fiona. So I'll open this up to the committee. Does anybody wish to comment on Fiona's presentation or ask any questions for clarity? No, you stunned everybody into silence. Okay, so we think that's, as a plan, it's going to meet the needs that it's set out to and meet its aims and objectives. We, as a committee, I believe that. Yeah? Yep. Okay, well, noted and supported then, Fiona.
Excellent, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay. So item number 13, we move on to the grant register. I take it, Linda, you're taking that item?
I am, yes. So yeah, it's in the pack for you. It's just the latest update on the grant register. You'll note that the report says we've had 2 further grants awarded since you've last seen it, which is a £98,000 feasibility study around cycling and walking. But the big one there being 17.5 million additional Brownfield money that came in sort of towards, well, the last couple of weeks really, but as a result of underspends, I think, from HMG. Just to note, since we've produced the papers, we've had a further award of another 7.5 million. That is for the Social Decarbonisation Fund Wave 1. Details of that will be in the financial monitoring report to the 18th of March board. We'll update this register for next time, but again, yet another successful award there. Most of that funding will be flowing out to our external partners, so local authorities from that perspective. But happy to take any questions on the grant register.
I've got a couple of questions, Linda. So there's a number of funds which are coming to an end. One of which is the money that government has made available for transport over the pandemic, the recovery fund. We know that was coming to an end, I think it's on the 5th of April. Do we have any announcement from government yet on that fund?
So we've had an indication from government that they will be extending the bus and light rail recovery funding for another further 6 months nationally. And we are still in discussions with them around actually an extension after that for the rest of the financial year. So I am less nervous than I was when I set the budget. As you know, we've set a £10 million provision aside for the resilience for the transport operations network in the budget. But yeah, we've had formal notification that it will be extended for 6 months. Sorry, at this stage.
Well, I guess that's some comfort. And let's hope that over that 6 months we see a continued recovery. But clearly the challenges will be there, or likely to be there further on down the line. So it's definitely one for us to keep an eye on. And then just another very quick question. And I was looking at particularly the digital skills pilot, which comes to an end at March 2023. But how do the success of these pilots get measured? So digital boot camp, for example, how does the success of that pilot get measured? Where's it reported to?
I suppose it depends on the scale of the actual award, I think, and whether or not it went through to the CA board in the first place. So obviously the larger pots of funding, we do M&E on all of the grants, because not least it's required as a condition of us claiming the grant in the first place. And depending on the value of that grant will depend on where that actually gets reported to. So some of them go through the performance reporting that goes through to our executive team because they are smaller awards. A lot of them will go up through into the combined authority. So you know, just in terms of the success or otherwise of whether or not we want to actually invest and continue with those pilots. As Fiona's just the link back really into Fiona and the work that we've done as the finance and business hub, I think we're in a much stronger position now that actually going into this next financial year, because I've got an integrated plan for the authority that links the activity, the financials and the workforce planning, actually that will be feeding through another layer of performance reporting back through the monitoring of the annual plan as well. So I think that's been sort of that we've tried to strengthen that going into next year. But at the minute it's ad hoc depending on the value of the funding essentially.
I mean, I do see a clear link between the success or measuring the success and the outcomes against the levelling up agenda.
Yeah.
And us being able to prove that where we're putting money and resource into, actually it's delivering the outcomes that we need in terms of that levelling up. So I do think that reporting process is critical.
Yeah, I'm quite excited about it. I think it's a big step forward for us actually going into this year around being able to really cohesively report on activity and the direct impact it's had.
Okay, any other questions for Linda? No, thanks very much, Linda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And that takes us to agenda item number 14, which is the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee minutes of the 7th and 17th of January. Councillor Clements has sent her apologies, so it's just to ratify those minutes. And we also have minutes of the 23rd of February, which came out to you via email yesterday. So if I can have endorsement for those minutes, as we are still caught. Yeah, there.
I was there.
You're endorsing.
I was there.
Thank you. Super. And then that moves us on to the very final agenda item, and that's the West Midlands Combined Authority Forward Plan, March 22 to March 23.
According to my sheet.
No, I know. I amended it on the hoof. Any comments from anybody? Vera?
From what's just been said, some of the stuff we actually discussed in the transport is a lot more clearer, because now they're actually extending this another 6 months. That does make all the difference, because what I found being on the ground actually catching public transport and what have you, it appears to me that they was actually working towards the fact they was going to lose that money, and they were starting to cut back and so forth. And now I think they'll realise they're not, so it will start to move forward again a bit, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it will. I think the issue in terms of long-term planning is still the level of uncertainty. So, you know, it's for 6 months, hopefully for 12 months, but that still gives the CA in terms of long-term planning some uncertainties. But yeah, it's certainly good news. There isn't being withdrawn on the 6th of April. So any other comments on the forward plan? No?
Chair, could I just ask on the forward plan here, I'm just looking at it here, but is there any sort of potential end date to go into these? Because I'm just seeing various things here. They talk about lead officer confidential, but there's no potential end date. Just for clarity. Is there any at all?
On the WMCA board forward plan.
Yeah.
I think that would be one for Dan.
Just wonder if there was any at all.
So yeah, it's perhaps not as laid out as clearly as it might be, but if you see they're grouped by particular meetings, so on what's page 127 of your pack, the first page of the plan, you'll see those are the items that are listed to go to the 18th of March. CA board, and then if you scroll down, there's the next one in June, and then subsequent to that. So the first couple of pages are all planned to go to March, and they'll be appearing on the agenda in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Any other comments? No. So we note that forward plan. So thank you everybody. We have run over slightly, but we did pull it back, so we've gone as far as we could have done. But thank you everybody for your contributions. As I said at the start, I think we've had a really good year of scrutiny. So thank you all for your attendance and your contributions.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And obviously, well, that's the last meeting. So.
Yes.
One of them.